Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Dr. Cammy Goes Keto, where I'm working on transitioning from the standard American diet to a ketogenic diet and pulling off of sugar, which I've been addicted to for decades, ever since my son passed away and I got addicted to that sugar. So thank you so much. I'm with Mike Collins, the sugardetox.com website, and he's the sugar-free man, known as the sugar-free man, and he's helped tens of thousands of people get off of sugar through his program, which has really been helpful for me and helpful for lots of people that I know. So thank you so much, Mike, for being here with me today.
Thank you. Thanks for being so open and honest to do your sugar consulting online.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. And this is an open, honest, and vulnerable discussion for me today because I have realized that I really I cannot be off of my sugar with long term. I mean, I was able to stay off for 90 days because I had made that commitment, but in the back of my mind, I knew that I was going to be eating sugar after those 90 days. And I'm really realizing that I can't do it long term without the help of my higher power, who I choose to call God. And this higher power was instrumental in helping me get off of alcohol, which I quit in 2000. And I remember at that moment, I had a spiritual awakening with my God when I was pregnant, 7 months pregnant, and drinking, which of course was smaller amounts and only once a week. Bless you. But I had to ask God to help me quit because I had been trying to quit. I had been stashing bottles. I had been thinking that I needed to quit. I had been drinking pregnant, which as an OBGYN, I knew that that wasn't right, although I didn't drink in first semester. But in any case, I had to ask God and completely surrender to the fact that I could not stop drinking on my own. And this was a hard thing for me to do because I'm such a control person. I think I'm under the delusion, that I'm in control of things. So that worked for me. I asked God, and I remember God saying to me, okay. And then I just did the next right thing, whatever was the next right thing in my day, which was not drink, and started going to meetings and just did that for the first year and never really had a program, but stayed sober, kind of like a dry drunk. And then I was going to meetings and then John in my meeting said, well, maybe you should get a big book and maybe you should get a sponsor and start working the steps. So I did that after 1 year and really started growing and going through a progression of personal growth and a progression of stability off of the alcohol completely. I had a couple of slips, one in 2015, one in 2016 for one night only, and was back in the rooms. So I've done a really pretty good job with that and really grown my spiritual program and gotten closer to a higher power. And I'm finding that this has been a really difficult thing for me to do with sugar because none of the groups out there, well, I guess that I know of, there might be groups, and you might know, Mike, really encourage a 12-step program in conjunction with the pulling off of the sugar, flour, and caffeine. And I'm feeling, for me, that's what I need at this point in time.
Gotcha. Oh, there's lots of 12-step groups. Lots of 12. I mean, the
Well, I
12.
guess that's true. There's Food Addicts Anonymous, and there's EDA, Eating Disorders Anonymous, and there are groups out there that do it, but I don't know. None of them.
Based on the 12-step. So, look, I consider myself a 12-step anthropologist. Okay. And what a 12-step anthropologist does or is someone who has vigorously studied the 12-step, the creation of the 12 steps and the 12-step, mostly in the food group stuff. The 12 steps saved my life in the early days. And you know, I have to give them credit. And people would know that I was lying if I were to say that a lot of the formulation of the communities that we have today, the group dynamics didn't come from the 12-step stuff. Now, that said, the 12 steps originated from something called the Oxford Group, which was a spiritual and religious group. And you can see the underpinnings all the time. If you look and you understand the um, both groups and you research it, you can see it. And I think it's, for some people, an important part of the formula. But I also believe that, as you mentioned earlier, I think before we came on, that the 12 steps have a really cool view of the term and the construct of higher power. It can be the group, it can be a chair, it can be anything that you believe is greater than you. The universe, nature, as you said these things, nature, whatever. It can be anything that you deem larger than yourself to take your, and it's really a practice to take yourself out of the egoic thing that is addiction, where you're focused solely on yourself. You're focused solely on you, me, this kind of infantile lack of emotional development that is addiction in general, right? And I think, honestly, this is a good time probably to think about this or talk about this idea that somehow addictive substances and addictive behaviors can create that type of individual, that type of selfish, self centered individual. And that these writings in the early days before they knew the science of all this are kind of amazing when you look at it, when you look at what they had written. And really now we're starting to understand scientifically that you were really focused on this reactivation, this returning, this continuous returning to the dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, GABA, oxytocin, adrenal glands, endorphins, cannabinoid receptors, all of the brain and body reward chemicals that whatever the substance is, whether it's the alcohol or the sugar, and that this created this kind of infantile, egoic personality who seems selfish and self-centered, and that these became, in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, a trait or traits of the individual that has that, and that you have to let go of those traits, right? So there's an interesting and storied history of the evolution. And, the evolutions into the 12 steps, OA, Overeaters Anonymous, was really literally one of the first, if not the first, I have to get that clarified, additional step program of other things, right? And in that process, they created a food group that was based on the same 12-step principles. And you guys can Google the 12 steps if you want. But the 12 steps bring you through a process of self-evaluation, self-admitting what your issues were, that kind of stuff. More in a, don't take this in a derogatory way, but in a churchy kind of way, in a way that is more aligned with a religion than a scientific process, if that makes sense. And that's like important. So, and then it spun off Food Addicts Anonymous and Food Addicts in Recovery Anonymous, which sounds like the same group, but it's two different groups. And CEA How, and what was the last one?
Ishi?
Gray Sheeters, right? So the Gray Sheeters was first because literally in OA meetings, they would have a gray sheet where you shouldn't do this or that or the other. And what they did that made it different is they named a abstinence where no flour and no sugar. Okay. They named the abstinence. Still to this day in OA, and I hope this one clarification will help people, they don't name an abstinence. You can have a cheat day. You can do anything you want. You name what you want to eat, but you apply the 12-step principles. And I have seen abject failures, upwards of 20 years of people attending meetings because they refuse to say that they don't eat flour and sugar or attempt to not eat flour and sugar. Failures, but they're very kind, and it's, again, a support group. But when you go to the other four, and now they've added Sugar Addicts Anonymous, by the way, which is pretty much an online group. There's very, very, if there's any, in-person groups. So there's 5 that name the abstinence, no abstinence, no flour, no sugar. And I akin it genuinely to the success of Weight Watchers in the early days, where they had quality groups. So when you blend, and there's a lot of success in Food Addicts Anonymous, Food Addicts in Recovery Anonymous, the Gray Sheeters, and CEA How, where they name the abstinence, right? Because there's a lot of support. They still do not have large in-person groups yet. They're still very small, but they're. I'm telling you this history simply because what we chose to do was to allow people to name their own abstinence, to name the name their own spirituality. Okay. And we dictate, like those five support groups that are now 12 step, no flour, no sugar in our program, no caffeine, because, and this was intuitive for me 7 or 8 years ago when we really started the meetings in earnest, but I've known it forever that you needed to have the abstinence names. And now with the advent of metabolic psychiatry, the reasoning behind it, the peer stuff, which since the pandemic has been efficaciously proven out that the online meetings work near as well as an in-person meeting. So it's the meetings and the abstinence that you name. Okay. And the process of going through the emotional growth, which is exactly what the 12 steps takes you through when you eliminate alcohol or drugs or whatever. Okay. Now, all of that said, we have tens of thousands of successes and thousands of written testimonials of people who have gone through our process and never once in those 7 or 8 years mentioned their religious affiliation or their spiritual affiliation. Okay. Because I believe that we took the good and left the things that I would like to see people, and we didn't make science the higher power, but we lean more on the science of recovery, or the science of recovery and change and transformational behavioral change, and let people choose their own spirituality in the process. So again, almost a decade in, no one has, we don't have religious group or religious meetings. We don't have spiritual meetings. We don't have any of that stuff. Okay. And it seems to have worked. Again, I think I need to double click and drill into this idea that the 12 steps take you through a very similar process as we do when you eliminate the alcohol. Here's the problem, and this is the big problem. And I'm not railing against the 12 step, and we will come back to just spirituality and higher power in our program. But if you've ever been to a meeting, you see all of the cakes and cookies and coffee in the back of the room. And in our history, because I've been open about my alcoholism and drug addiction, there have been thousands of recovering alcoholics who have come to us and said they are sober 5 years, 10 years, whatever, and they cannot get off the sugar. Reason being is, yeah, exactly. So the reason being is that they, the meetings in essence support this. And in pages 163 and 164 on the big book, they say you should use sugar as a substitute. Okay. And to a man, to a woman, every single one of them has said, the recovering people, the people that have been sober and off drugs and alcohol, that sugar has been harder. Okay. And that's because of its ubiquitousness, and that you can give this to a child societally, and no one, 90% of parents would thank you. It's not yet reached, the science has not caught up with the idea of this construct. Okay. Now, is someone's spirituality important in this process? I would say yes, if the spirituality is a part of your life. I really would. But I do not profess or ever want to be a leader in however someone views that part of their life. It's not my goal. It's not what I think is important. If it's been an important part of your life and other people's lives, that group of 500 or 1,000 that have come through our community who were already sober and used our principles to get off of sugar and flour and put type 2 in remission and lose 100 pounds because they were not able to do the sugar. And a lot of people just say, when there isn't a 12-step group for sugar or food, go to an AA meeting, and just when they say alcohol, you think sugar and you substitute the two, right? Well, I didn't really want to do that. But anyway, what I'm getting at here is this idea that I have taken the best of what I believe was an evolutionary process in the development of humanity and added the science. And now the advent of metabolic psychiatry and that this diet can change the behavior and the abstinence can change the behavior, rewire the brain, and most of all, and most importantly, and probably the linchpin of all of this, heal the brain of substance abuse. And you and I have talked about this, and we're not talking out of school where you have the GLP-1s, which I believe in the end are going to be a brain influenced drug, not a body influenced drug, and the SSRIs, and that when someone is abstinent of all brain altering substances, they heal up and the choices that they make from there forward are easier. They makes more sense. Their frontal cortex comes back online. They heal the midbrain, all of that kind of stuff. So that's my short diatribe on the whole construct. And I really want to thank you because literally the first time it's ever been articulated in public. And no one's ever asked. So there you go.
Well, thank you so much for that, Mike. Thank you so much for your knowledge and for your experience and for really laying it out in a really concise, easy way to understand, because I really have a lot of respect and admiration for you and everything that you've done, with your own personal journey and with, helping, thousands and tens of thousands of people get off of sugar because we need this. It's an epidemic and the society is so sick right now. And that's where my goal is. That's where my motivation is for me to try to help people, for me to try to help other people understand that they're not the only one going through this situation, that I'm out there talking to people and everybody's understanding that they're not alone in this situation and that, there's a way to go through it and have success. And I really think that for me, it is like my N=1 right now is, me finding my spirituality with my food and how that's going to play out. And I know that we had talked briefly before we started taping about addiction, about abstinence versus moderation, because my food voice will say, oh, you can moderate, you can have a small amount, you can do this, you can do that, you can control it. And I know that for me, when you look at the addiction models and you look at what the metabolic psychiatry is starting to figure out, it really is abstinence that you need off of that product. You cannot be getting it here and there. It's like heroin or cocaine or those kinds of things, alcohol, where you just cannot be putting it, here and there as a small amount. So I know that for me, abstinence is a definite way to go. And I'm just trying to figure out how my spirituality is going to fit into my journey because I think that it's lacking right now for me personally. And I'm working diligently on that because I haven't been successful in the long term. And
Right.
I think that's the piece that's missing. And I think it really is a bringing together, not of religion, but of spirituality. Maybe it is a chair that a red shoe. Somebody once in AA had a red shoe that was their higher power. A lot of people I know have nature as their higher power or, the spirit of the energy of the universe. I
Right.
really believe in, that universal energy that connects us all together. And that could be your power. But yeah, so that's where I am personally. And I'll probably be talking more about it because I'm just trying to figure it out. And, you're right. There are a lot of groups that have the 12-step program and definite food abstinence in there. And I just haven't been a part of that. I'm kind of exploring it on my own. I have a great OA sponsor right now, and we both are very spiritual and very much into abstinence of certain foods.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, there's a couple things that I want to mention and not clarify, but kind of give help and examples of what I think called, efficacy in behavioral change for the folks is that one of the constructs or constants in our program, and all due respect to Dr. Jason Fung and others like this who talk about fasting, and I'm going to make a comparison here, but so if someone comes in with a intermittent fasting program, say they eat from noon to 6 or 7, they have a 6 or 7 hour window, we're all for it. You can keep it. Uh, or they do 2 and 3 day fasts. That's fine. But that's gonna be detrimental to someone who, who's never done that before and then wants to use that as a functional, a way that they can get off sugar. They'll just, I'm not going to eat anything for 3 days, and then that's going to kick off my sugar abstinence, right? Doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Never has. Now, that said, I want to draw the same parallel with the higher power thing, right? You're not going to find here and in the 12 steps, so that people know who've never been inside the 12 steps. And I'm telling you, I didn't go to a 12-step meeting for years because I thought it was a cult or a religion, and I don't know if I was proven right or wrong. It doesn't matter. What I want to say is that by the same token with the fasting in a 12-step program, everything leads back to the higher power, everything. And for the people, the terminology, slang, if you will, in the community is the people who are very aggressively 12 steps are called big book thumpers, meaning they take the book written by Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob, and they really adhere to it. And what they're adhering to really is the function of the higher power. And when they don't have an answer, they quote not scripture or not any specific God, but they quote a higher power as the answer and the solution, right? And the last thing I want to clarify is that there's a tenet in the 12 step programs that states no outside information can be delivered in meetings or, talked about, preached in stories or in working with, sponsors and sponsees, no outside information. Now, for a book written in the 30s or 40s, I can't,
1935, I think.
and to not look to the evolution of the scientific world, there's a piece missing there. Everything's still about, people think that, because we evolved the way that into humans over millions of years, that we're done evolving. But we're not done evolving. Now we have to evolve to handle screens and handle everything else as the world that we know and we live in today. And this evolution of behavioral change and the behavioral change process, well, the 12 steps brought us great things, including the understanding to even be studied of people meeting together, which is the strongest principle in the community of 12 steps. It's the meetings, period, end of story, and even proven to grow stronger and larger during the pandemic and post-pandemic when all 12 steps meetings moved online as well, like everything. So I just want to make sure people get it without having to explore it if that's something they want to do. But I, in no uncertain terms, would ever deprive someone of whatever their spirituality has. And the reason I don't mention my own is because I don't think it would be correct for me to, like, people always ask me, what do I eat? Right. And I try and have been steering away from it for almost a decade and not telling anybody what I eat. It's not relevant. You know what I mean? Because back then I also believed that, well, I'm not going to get into that part of it, but what I'm saying is, I'm not going to tell them what my spiritual life is like or what my spirituality is like, or even if I have one. And so, yeah, I mean, I think this topic, I'm glad that you brought it up. I think it's really super important for a lot of people. I mean, one of the things I will mention that in the evolution and my love of the study of the evolution, the anthropology of it all, that there is a very, very successful group that I have not seen replicated in the Christian community called Celebrate Recovery. And Celebrate Recovery is just a Christian movement of the 12 step. That's it. That's what it is. It could be another 12-step meeting, but it is, instead of higher power, they name their God, whichever Christian community you belong to, right? And they just literally substitute it. But its success rate and its success is huge for the Christian community, right? But it's based on, abstinence, mostly about it's alcohol and drugs mostly. So, I mean, the offshoots of the change are amazing,
Mhm,
and everyone has to
mhm.
own what works for them. And I love seeing new groups and studying it and everything. And there's also a zero spirituality group based only in science, based largely in all of the principles. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Mike, for this. I really appreciate this conversation. And I hope that it helps some people just at least look at what their spiritual part of it is or what that other piece is. I'm trying to figure out right now for me what that other piece is in addition to the scientific, metabolic, psychiatry, physical part of it that we're learning more and more and more about, trying to figure out how the two go together for me.
Yeah, so exciting, so exciting.
It really is an exciting time. It's an exciting time to be around and be watching what's happening.
And you're a gifted gonna be, if you're not already, a gifted warrior in this world to have, and I wanna acknowledge you in this and tell the audience that the idea that Cammy is laying everything from her spirituality to her, fits
Binge eating.
eating and her, her grief processing literally that you would do in a therapist's office and keep shielded even from your employer kind of stuff. And, your medical records and HIPAA and you no one knows that you're doing this work or whatever. You're doing it on YouTube. It's like amazing. And it's going to, as I've said many times, going to be a cultural classic in the recovery movement because of a couple of things. One, the SSRI evolution and the GLP-1 evolution, all at the same time with your sugar abstinence and what everyone wants to know about the weight loss, right? And so it's like I can't think of a more honorable thing to do for your fellow man. I really can't.
Well, thank you so much, Mike. I appreciate that. I mean, my big goal is to get healthier, especially metabolically and spiritually, and to help others. So,
Yeah.
yeah. All right. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Mike. We'll see you next time.
Take care.
All right. You too. Bye bye.